Good day, everyone. We are here to present our thesis topic, the significant indicators of early warning systems for currency crisis in selected ASEAN countries using the signal approach and the logistic regression analysis. My name is Mikhaela Chan. Together with me is Mary Kristine Juan, Berndhart Co, Erryl Ron Lacanlale, and Dr. Tomas Tiu. Here are the following contents of this presentation. For introduction, studies mainly revolve around Western countries, which leaves few to no studies to support ASEAN countries in developing models suitable for defending themselves from currency crisis impacts. As these come at high cost and generate economic problems, we are focusing on the EWS as a preventative measure. We are here to focus on evaluating the two models in determining a currency crisis. For the statement of the research problems, it revolves around the predictability of the EWS models on currency crisis, which of the two models is more accurate, and the significant indicators in the selected countries. In order to address these, here are the following objectives of the study. To determine the ability of the EWS to predict the currency crisis using the two approaches. Second is to determine which between the two models is more accurate. Third is to identify the significant indicators of the currency crisis. Fourth is to present the meta-possibilistic fuzzy index function as a method in dating currency crisis. And lastly is to identify the indicators, which among the indicators produce significance. However, the scope and limitation of this study is that it will only focus in the Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia. And it will only cover the first quarter of 1995 up until the fourth quarter of 2020, and we will only use the two approaches. Next is our framework, wherein our theoretical framework only uses the first generation models up until the fourth generation models, which are used by the ADB and IMF as reasons for the occurrence of a currency crisis. For the first one, here are the policy interventions. The second generation contains the expectations in intermediate economic situations. Third is the contagion and moral hazard driven investment. And the last generation model is the weak structures of an institution. And on our right side is our conceptual framework as our guide for our thesis.
Moving on to our methodology, the dependent variable of our study is the currency crisis episode, while the independent variables includes different economic variables. In dating currency crisis, we use the MPFIF, which combines different methods of dating currency crisis from established literature in order to improve the accuracy of our prediction. Our study revolves around the signal and logit model. The signal approach involves two levels. The first step consists of choosing the measures that are expected to influence a crisis, specifically the independent variables we have. And the second step determines the threshold for each indicator by minimizing the type 1 and type 2 error. We utilize both TME and NTS to assess the efficiency of the signal approach. And in the total misspecification error pertains to the sum of type 1 and type 2 error probabilities. This criterion assigns more weight to the missed crisis than that of an incorrectly identified crisis. The main difference is that under the NTS ratio, type 1 and type 2 error have equal weights. The logit model, the logit approach, which is considered a form of logistic regression, is an alternative method in predictive analysis. Compared to the signal approach, the logit model considers all the indicators simultaneously, which can be attributed as an advantage over the signal model. So we use the QPS as an additional measure for the logit model, wherein the QPS range from 0 to 2. If the score showed 0, it means perfect accuracy. A score of 2 represents perfect false signals indicating a missed crisis or a false alarm.
So these are the results of our study. Now moving on to the discussion. So a total of 60 crises were observed from the period. And Table 2 summarizes all the currency crisis observations. And Table 3 contains the summary of significant indicators for the two approaches. The Asian financial crisis was detected in Indonesia, Thailand, and Vietnam, but not in the Philippines and Malaysia. For the Philippines, this may be due to the quick and stringent financial economic policy set forth by the BSP as early as May 1997. The AFC devalued the peso by as much as 35.61 to a dollar, but it was able to manage the impact of the crisis well, and considering that during that time the country had strong trading ties with the US, with 39% of the exports of the country going to the US, the country was able to bounce back faster than its neighboring countries and even grew its GDP at that time. Another factor is the exchange rate, debt to equity ratio, and foreign borrowings of the country, which is comparatively more stable than its neighboring countries during this period. The interest rates, inflation rate, and CPI of the Philippines were affected by the currency value instead of the other way around, wherein the BSP places high importance in managing the exchange rate and currency value as it affects these three indicators. The impact of AFC was not reflected in Malaysia despite having large currency depreciation of the ringgit and recession during that period. This may be attributed to the limited data in the currency crisis index, specifically the nominal and real interest rate for Malaysia from 1995 to 2001, which may have had a substantial effect on the index should the data have been made available. And then for the global financial crisis, it was identified in the Philippines and Vietnam, but not for the other countries. For Thailand, this may be due to the little impact the GFC has had on the Thai economy compared to the Asian financial crisis. And then for Malaysia, after the AFC, it was able to establish effective financial regulatory risk frameworks, um, uh, risk management practices, and safety nets aimed at cushioning the impact of a crisis, such as that of the GFC, which was why the effects of the GFC was well contained. Um, in terms of Indonesia, they had appropriate policy response from the Indonesian government and its central bank, and the small export share to the GDP of the country helped Indonesia dodge the impact of the GFC, which may be why there was no crisis found during that period. The COVID-19 recession was not detected in any of the countries. For one, the reason is because the ASEAN countries have a good macroeconomic standing and are better prepared for shocks in the market given their past experience with AFC despite the projected drop in GDP. Second is that although there was observed decline in several economic indicators such as imports, exports, exchange rate, and GDP at the onset of the pandemic, the countries were able to bounce back and recover in the following months. And lastly, the indicators used in identifying currency crisis may not be as severely affected as other economic or financial indicators due to the foreign borrowings of institutions such as the ADB, which may have increased the levels of indicators such as international reserves, which was used in the study. The logit model was found to be more accurate compared to the signal approach because of its lower TME and QPS. And the comparative difference between the overall results of the two approaches and the per country results are significant. And this could be attributed to the nature of the both models, wherein the signal approach considers each indicator individually, as it determines whether that specific indicator triggers a currency crisis, which is a rare phenomenon realistically. Meanwhile, the logit model considers every indicator simultaneously in analyzing when a currency crisis is triggered, making the model better at estimating and predicting compared to the signal approach. In terms of the per country results, the variation may be due to the difference between each ASEAN countries in terms of their overall changes throughout the span of 1995 to 2020, specifically the policy and economic regulatory changes, financial frameworks, among others.
It can be concluded that there is no standard indicator and it is difficult to establish an indicator that will be significant for all countries, even if those countries have similarities in their economic and financial structure. One of the main reasons was maybe it's because the countries have different policies, governance, or regulations. That is why we believe that the researchers could develop an early warning system per country, which we believe will be more accurate. This study would help not only the Philippines but other countries that want to analyze on which indicators that could contribute to the occurrence of a crisis and which they could prepare ahead of time in order for them to respond and prepare, which could lessen the impact to their country.
That would be all. Thank you.